everybody. Welcome back to Citizen Bear. Today we're going to talk about a couple of different things, but we're going to focus on faith in the Republic, pick up where we left off with our last episode. I kind of wanted to lay a foundation last time. It wasn't very long, but it was kind of pointed to some of the foundational issues that I want to raise, and today I want to build on that a little bit. We're also going to, expand on the book and how some of this relates with the book and their themes within the story. The Demonstrative Citizen, The Revelation of Two Dragons, the book that I wrote, and we're kind of using that as a foundational piece for this discussion, at least this period of time in the podcast, to talk about different issues and how they relate to the book, how they relate to our society today, and some thoughts on that. It's a little hard sometimes. I wrote this book several years ago, and I thought that it was rather far out there and a little dystopian to try to paint a picture and make a point at several points. And it's a little frightening that some of that has started to come to pass, and we've evolved a little bit further on several topics, and it's worth talking about a little bit. But before we get started, I want to continue on a theme of calling bull. And again, I'm going to have to harp on something here that just seems to keep coming up. And I want to call bull on this. Again, in the far-left Democratic Party and people within the party and leaders of the party threatening to release names of ICE agents, and now we've even seen some horrific violence against ICE agents and Border Patrol people, and it's completely unacceptable. This turns the legal system upside down and represents a direct threat against the ballot box and the jury box, two of those boxes that Frederick Douglass believed our fundamental rights were founded in. And we should be very careful about this when we start taking on such violence and such actions. And it is clearly designed to turn our lives upside down and threaten the rule of law. In the book, Bear takes a lot of strength with this. He takes a lot of what you might call liberty, and I want to explain that through this a little bit and some of the differences. But for this segment right now, let's just be very clear. There is a difference between fighting for your rights and turning society upside down. Some would say that's not necessarily true, but it is absolutely true. When you are fighting for the rights of your society and you are fighting for your individual rights, then you are a patriot. When you are turning society upside down and you are fighting those who are upholding the rule of law for the right reasons at the right times, then you are absolutely following a Marxist and anarchist agenda, period. And I think we have to take real counsel in this, because these are difficult times, and I know that there is a lot of contrast in how we feel about certain objects. There's a lot of polarization in our society. And that comes from a lot of different places. But if we are going to resolve this, and if we are going to move forward, which I believe it is imperative to move forward and get rid of this polarization in our society, we have always had social discourse. Free society is built on that. We have our arguments, and we wear them on our shirt sleeve for the world to see. And that's a great thing. It's healthy. Even if people around the world don't understand it, we do, because we always come out better, stronger, and the world is better and stronger for it. But when we start attacking people for doing their jobs, we have a real problem. And we have to remember, this problem did not start with ICE agents picking up people in our country. This problem, illegal aliens in our country, particularly dangerous ones, this started with an open border under the Biden administration, where 20 million people approximately crossed our border, many of them who are very dangerous. We have, gangs, cartel members. We have people of military age from foreign countries. We've lost track of them. Good Lord, we need to get these people taken care of, and we need to find out what's going on within the borders of our country. And having our ICE agents, who are really the appropriate agency to do this, going after this and starting pulling together, is not a criminal act. It is not an attack on free society. It is upholding free society. And we have to make sure that we don't confuse those two principles. Confusing these things is really a hallmark quality of the Marxist movement. It tries to legitimize what they're doing with the idea of protecting free society. They blur the lines and they cross those lines. And they turn society upside down. And they use this as a legitimization through telling lies. That's really what they do. And it's a frightening thing. And it's not just happened here. It has happened throughout history. And we should be prepared for that. We should take a lesson from history and learn from other societies. And many people are starting to think of that. Remember, this did not start with the beginning with the enforcement of immigration law. It started with the breaking of immigration law. There is no doubt in my mind that this is a painful and heartfelt process. Everything about it is distasteful. Everything. But that doesn't mean we should not follow our laws and we should not get this done in defense of our country and make sure that there is no harm done to our country through this. And I am also convinced that in time, the choices we need to make as we get more and more of the dangerous people out of our country or under control, we will be able to make easier choices with other people and find people who are founded in faith and founded in love and are looking for opportunities. And we may be able to do a little bit better job or an easier way forward with that. But that is not this time, and it is not this moment, and it does not warrant firing or harming our law enforcement. Bear faces this choice in the book, and he takes a very different action from what I'm preaching now. He stands up to law enforcement, but it is because law enforcement is being used as a political weapon, and he knows it, and he stands up against it. And that is a very different contrast, again, from what we are talking about. He saw them violating this, and he saw it being used as a tool to attack his movement, which was fighting for the rights of his people and his country. And he wasn't afraid to define that line and stand up for people who he knew were in his inner circle, who were, being attacked for really just a political reason and not really for the betterment of this country or protection of this country. And that's a very different kind of thing. And the book talks about that. When I wrote that in the book, who would have dreamed that 20 million people would have been let into our country and our borders would have been opened? I mean, that's not something you'd think about and what's happening here. In any case, I believe that this is something that will be rectified and we'll get there. But we have to learn to differentiate between the things that are happening in our country that are for good and for bad. And we have to stand up for the good principles and the people who are doing the right thing. We always get a vote as citizens. Our weight always counts. Through the ballot box, through the jury box, through our voice on the soapbox. Our voice counts, and it matters. Laws are very weak if they don't carry the weight of the people behind them, the overall weight of the people behind them. But that is not the case here. And we can't just simply dismiss laws because it is inconvenient for ideological purposes. And that is Marxism at its best. So again, I'm calling bull on the political violence and the calls for political violence by political leaders in this country. It has to stop. And if it doesn't, then you are not really serving your office. You're not really upholding your oath of office. You are seriously endangering people's lives, and you are turning our society upside down. Moving along, having said that, we want to talk about faith, and I want to start talking about faith in our society in a very pointed way. I want to get on with considering much of what's going on and kind of on this theme that we've been talking about, and take a look at the book too. The main character, Bear, my friend Bear, as I often I refer to him, and I like the characters very much. I think most people I know who have read the book who tell me the same thing. They like the characters. He faces the concept of faith, and he really deals with having to turn to his faith for strength and guidance in a time where his life has been completely torn apart and turned upside down. He's so far beyond his comfort zone in what he knows he must do and what he believes that he has been called to do. He doesn't know where it's going to end. He doesn't know how it's going to come out. He just has to believe that he is doing his people's work, God's work, and he turns to his faith and he prays and he thinks and he reflects and he really works on that to have a strong center to carry forward. Maybe more importantly for Bear in the book, it is not just about him turning to faith. It is that his faith continues to evolve and grow. One of the hardest things for Bear and one of the greatest disappointments, and I think we see some of this in our society, and we're going to talk about it a little more in a minute, is that his church, the religion that he knows and believes in, has failed him. And he has to come to the conclusion that a church of men can fail and that they have weaknesses in a fallen world, and that they are not exempt from those failures and those corrupted ideas, and many of them flee. And Bear is left with his people, and people who join him and people who come to join him, and they have to find their own way. Their faith becomes really more pure and more back to what it's really meant to be. In Christianity, at least, it is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And they turn to that personal relationship, and they build on that personal relationship, and they start to grow, and they start to take on a lot of the different aspects of what their faith is about and what it really means, not with political ideology, not with, what's best for an organization or a group, really making choices based on the imperatives and the morals of their faith, and how they can carry that forward, and how that relates to their society and what's happening in their society. And I think this is an interesting point for this topic as we start moving forward on this discussion, and how it reflects in our society, and how it really is a moment of strength. It carries all of them forward, and it resolves them to do the right thing. It becomes a foundation for them to act in their crusade to save their society from authoritarianism and get back to some fundamentals when all of their resources and forces within this country's means have been tapped on globally. This fight, to some degree, very much to a large degree, comes to his shores, and he's forced with many others to join in and do what they believe is right. And there are many who stand against them. So the internal enemy must be faced before the external enemy can be defeated. And this is something that they have to do, is turn the tide within their country and start shaking off the burdens of big government. And in their faith, they find that ability to do that. I think when we talk about, shaking some of this off, I think one of the distinctions that I'm going to make early here, and it'll be carried forward actually through the next through this episode and the next, is talking about the fact that, when we talk about government and laws and big government, as we become more authoritarian, government grows, and growing government makes you more authoritarian. And we get more laws, more regulation, a larger bureaucracy. And there is this constant theme about what you shouldn't do. We become very limited on what we shouldn't do. And Bear is caught, like so many of us today, in a world where we shouldn't be doing just about everything. And that's not really Christianity. The old laws gave us a guidance of what we shouldn't do. But Christ's teachings on the all in all really taught us what we should be doing. And that is if we follow what we should be doing, the old laws are still important, but they become less relevant because we are doing the right thing. And I think, and we can see the old laws from a very different perspective. Not that they need to go away, but we can look at them from a very different perspective if we are doing the right thing, if we are finding a new way forward. And that is in Christ's teachings. And I think this is true in the difference between authoritarianism and free society, where in authoritarianism we continue to get more laws, more regulation, more government, and in free society we're focused more on, yes, we need laws, all societies need laws, all societies need stuff like that, right? We circumscribe our society, and free society, that's very important too, to have boundaries. But not to the point where we are choked off from thought and new potential, where we can reach new potentials and dream and go forward and act on our ambitions in the right kind of way. This is more of Christ's teaching, where we are looking at what we can do, what is possible. That is free society. That is the concept of our constitutional republic. What is possible? What is dreamable? What is doable? And how can we do that in the right way? And there is a grave distinction there. And we are suffering today from this concept. And faith in its base, and faith bringing on being a moral foundation for our society and a moral foundation for our laws, is very important, as we talked about in the last episode, is a very, very important concept, both in the book and in our society. And when those laws become so regulatory and so punitive that we can no longer function, that we can no longer exercise our freedom of thought and our processes going forward to dream, to hope, to be better, to grow, then to choose to enter into Christ's covenant, then we are failing. We are no longer really free. And I think Bear knows, and I think we should all understand that these choices, these actions, when we find our way forward and our foundations in faith and our moral imperatives, the imperatives that we have that are founded in morality, we find that there is a better way, and that many of these laws are in contradiction to us. And this is the loggerhead between free society and authoritarianism, big government and free society, as we start moving forward. And we discussed this a little bit in the last episode with talking about how foundational to our imperatives and to our things in the last episode. Like free will, all peoples process the inherent nobility that lies at the heart of our free society. Free society and faith, particularly Christianity, encourage and require great use of free will and the nobility of the common man. In contrast, the authoritarian seeks to repress our nobility and free will to the point that it's almost completely impaired, or so he believes. This is also the reason that an authoritarian severs all ties with faith and makes the ideology of the state society's new religion. That's kind of a dangerous concept, but what happens with that, picking up from where we were in the last episode, that idea is very much one where we start to lose when our imperatives are no longer founded in morality and our morality is no longer founded in faith-based in love. Our imperatives fade away and our morality runs adrift. And it is fair game, easy pickings for authoritarian leaders, tyrants, and so on to change those moralities. And this is one of the things you see in society with the Marxists trying to change the values of your society radically, turning things upside down so that they are no longer, and it is easy then to gain control of it with authoritarianism and say, this is the new faith of the people. And we have seen that time and time again in history, whether it is fascism or communism or whatever ism you want to talk about. It has always, always been their hallmark. And it has never, ever been a way forward. It has always been a quantum leap backward. When we really talk about this, and I want to get back onto the faith concept here in our society, and I'm going to make a very powerful distinction here, kind of a bold look. I talked about faith, our morality being anchored in faith-based in love. That's true. And the teachings of Christ and our faith and other religions that are based in love. But when we look at ourselves and how we conduct ourselves and we make our choices, those choices are either founded in love or they are founded in hate. There is good, there is evil in this world, and I do believe evil walks this earth. And we should be very careful about that. I know there are many other factors. People can have emotional problems and other things. But even that can sometimes leave an opening for evil. But there is hate and there is love. And people will use hate powerfully to overturn a society and overturn those societies when they're founded in love. I know that people say that society is not always founded in love and that they want to point to many of the hardships in the world and many of the things that have gone wrong. I'm not preaching that people are perfect. We know that. We know that we're imperfect. We know that we're on a journey to be better. That is the point in entering into Christ's covenant. What is admitting our flaws and trying to improve on them and grow in that relationship. And the church should be helping us with that. Instead, we are often getting a dose of ideological poison instead of a true faith sermon. I think the real problem is that not that people aren't based in love and that they don't want to be based in love. I think too many people today are facing a world that frightens them, and they're not willing to act on their convictions. You know, Frank Serpico, years ago, and many people might not know who he is. He was a New York City police detective, and he dealt with corruption, almost lost his life dealing with corruption in the New York City Police Department. Way back when, not today. It was long before it got cleaned up. And he was asked by Congress, when he was testifying about this, you know, how much of the New York City Police Department is corrupt? And I thought his answer was very profound, and I think it's very applicable here. He said 10% are completely honest. He said 10% of the police force is completely corrupt. And the other 80% would really like to be honest. And I think we have that in our society today. That wasn't true years ago, but it is today, where there is a portion of our society who is completely founded in its faith and its beliefs in our society and free society. And there is a small fragment who is completely looking to overturn this for many, many reasons, and some of them are very dark. And they are working to capitulate to authoritarian powers in the world, like China, and some of them are just looking to overturn free society. But more to the point, I think that other 80% are founded in love. I just think they'd like the courage to act on it. And we have to be able to provide that courage. I think they have it. I think that the day-to-days of life just make it hard to act on it. When you have a family, when you have children, I've raised a family, I know, it can be very difficult and it can be hard to take a stand. And they can be sometimes referred to as the silent majority. But they are out there, and we should never dismiss them, but we also need to encourage them and strengthen them to go on and fight for their faith and fight for their rights in these things. And they should never really be afraid. But it is the tactic of the Marxist and the authoritarian to intimidate those who are more concerned, more gentle in their conduct, maybe a little afraid, weaker status. Maybe they have too much to lose, and they are vulnerable to this. They don't want the trouble. And that makes them good people in society. In a free society, they're wonderful. But free society isn't free, and it doesn't come easily. And it must be fought for and held in place, or we'll lose it certainly. And people in today's world know that. And they're looking to take it away from you. In many ways, the church has failed us in a lot of ways, in a lot of these churches. And I'm not picking on any one particular denomination or church. I think a lot of people can point to a lot of different churches and see problems. I think many try very hard, and I think there are many ministers out there who are priests who try very hard to be better in our society and try to bring God's message, Christ's message, and bring people to Christ's covenant as a way forward. And I think it's incredibly important and essential. I think there are those ministers who realize that it is important, that the best medicine, the best thing they can do is to heal people, is to give them strength in Christ's foundation in his ministry, and teach them to at least strengthen their bonds with Christ's love, Christ's grace, and also the strength of what lies ahead for them in their resolve. I think that, I've already talked about Bear being in this situation where he's struggling with the church and other things, and I think this is something that a lot of people today are struggling with organized religion, and it is a shame that the church has fallen so far away from being able to help people, and it's hard. We shouldn't underestimate the need that's out there. People have been economically and sociologically devastated in our society. The promise of America has been ripped out from underneath them in many ways, and they train and they retrain. They've lost homes. They look for new jobs, often have to relocate. Sometimes they have trouble with bills and raising a family, and that has never been part of our America. And then they turn around and see CEOs of banks that fail to manage their affairs while being rewarded with their tax dollars. And it can be a very, very punishing and painful time and very unfair. And faith, they turn to their faith, and I think our faith fails to be there. Sometimes our church fails to be there. And it's not that the church can solve their economic problems. It's not that the church can solve a lot of the problems in the world just directly. But it can tell them that they're not alone in it. And it can bring them together. And when we bring people together, and when we help them care for each other, I think we will be amazed at how much many of those problems can be solved. And when we become a stronger voice as one people in those things through our faith, not to make the church turn the church into the state, but as individuals carrying that message, carrying that hope, carrying those values, resecuring our moral our imperatives and our morality to that faith, God's love, then we are able to love each other a little better, and we are able to go forward with great hope and great determination and great courage, I might add. I want to pick up on looking at a couple of points here. I think too many political leaders, in their inability to deal with this, in many ways I think they lose their own faith, and I think too many of them have begun to either press for activism or ideological means and starting to become, maybe even pressing violence in some cases. This topic, this is not a way forward for the church. It is not a way forward for, people found in love. You are supposed to teach people to do a better job than that and find a better way forward. It is not that we cannot rise to the challenge of violence. And we should not be afraid to defend our rights and our right to enter into Christ's covenant or practice our faith in any other religion for that matter. But we should never be afraid to defend those things if necessary. We should be strengthened by our faith to defend those things when necessary. But we should never be told by our church to simply go out and be activist against our government and our way of life because we feel it's failed us. It's not that our way of life has failed us. It's that we've had too many pressures and too many people who have made poor decisions or maybe even intentionally made bad decisions and led us in a bad way because they have a bad vision of the world and the way forward in our world. And in our next episode, we're going to talk about that a little bit, about fine lines and absolutes in our society. So we have to be careful about that and get back to the basics of really helping people realize that they are not alone and that they are empowered, and if they trust God, things can work out very powerfully for them. It has been a hallmark of our society for even before our founding, and we should not lose sight of that now. Another area that I really struggle with the church in is the preaching of the revelation in these times. Now, of course, I believe the Word of God and I believe the revelation, but I also believe the Word of God in the fact that Christ himself told us that only the Father knows when the end times will come. And I think that and when the return of Christ will come, and they're two separate things really, but we need to really get around the fact that, okay, there are signs, and the Bible does tell us about signs, and I certainly have my own personal beliefs on this, and I would confess that there are signs that we can take to heart right now, and that have been occurring over the last 50, 60, 70 decades, that have been evolving in our world. But that doesn't mean that we should bury ourselves in the revelation. We should bury ourselves in the concepts of Christ returning. I would love the idea for Christ to return. I'm the first and foremost to think it would be great. I would love to see my friend and my Savior, Jesus Christ, return and sit upon the throne. But and bring his kingdom to this world. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen today. And I think that is a lack, again, of courage. I hate to say that, but it is. I really think we should be careful. Even if we believe it is at hand, we should be careful. We don't want it played on us simply to benefit Satan and the authoritarian, and I do believe the authoritarian is an emissary of Satan in this world. I think that when we look at this, we should be very careful about how much we take it on. We can be hopeful. We can keep our faith. We can even read signs. We can talk about it. We can read scripture. We can be prayerful on it. But we have to remember that horrific times have come before. The authoritarian has raised his head, and the anarchist has raised his head before in our world. And he has led true evil to power, to people who are harmed and by economic times. Probably in our most recent history in the world, World War II would be a prime example of this. I think many people today leave World War II so far behind, it seems it could be the Revolutionary War. It's just in their past. And that's not true. But it is active history that is back there, and we should remember it. We can learn from this. We saw people in Europe evading the blitzkrieg, they carrying their luggage, putting things on wheelbarrows and ox carts just to try to get ahead of the onslaught in Europe. Just getting away with not much more than the clothes on their back, trying to flee someplace where they can get to Allied lines that were existing at the time, the French army or the British Expeditionary Force, trying to get behind lines where they thought they might be safe. We saw concentration camps and the Holocaust where people were, for their religious beliefs or maybe even their ethnic heritage, were loaded upon boxcars and taken directly to camps where they were separated into workers and those who would be executed immediately. If that's not apocalyptic, I don't know what is. We saw the retaking of Europe with Allied forces and the bombing of German cities, the bombing of Allied cities, and people scattering and running under the fear of new weapons and airplanes and all kinds of different weapons that at the time were very new and creative. And they brought true fear and pain and death everywhere. There was nothing but horror and hate in the world in that field. But good people did come. And they fought hard for this. And we can find, these things that have happened before in our world, and we can take strength from that. Christ did not return on a white horse to establish his kingdom, because I believe that he realized that people could still enter into his covenant. And just as a personal note, I don't believe Christ returns just because the world is corrupt. I believe he returns that because authoritarianism and fear no longer allow people are no longer able to really openly enter into his covenant and are able to join with him. I think that is why he really returns, to set that right. But we have to remember that through all of this, that time in World War II and the true atrocities that we saw, the true horrors that we saw, we have to remember that good people took up arms and they did the impossible. And they did not just come, they kept coming. There was a time for the 8th Air Force that every crew didn't rotate home. Everyone got shot down by the Luftwaffe. But they didn't stop. They kept coming. They put new planes in the field, and eventually they broke the Nazi air power. They broke the Nazi war machine, and they controlled the sky, dominated the skies. But they didn't quit. And they didn't quit in the face of death. And I will tell you, I truly believe that their faith carried them through those times. They landed the beaches, let me tell you, the Nazi movement did not believe that free people could overrun people who were bred to be a master race. And they did. And when Franklin Roosevelt announced his war production, the people of the leaders of Germany at the time laughed because they didn't believe that anyone could produce that much material for a war effort on a two-front war. They not only did it, they exceeded it. So we should never believe that we should never lose hope in the fact of what we can do as a free people, and we should never lose hope in what we are capable of. It's not that God didn't return. It's not that God wasn't here. It's that God marched in the hearts of great, great, great people who were willing to put everything out there because they believed in the merits of free society and faith, and they believed in the merit of good people that can conquer the world and make it a better place. And certainly if there are flaws in their generation, they can hand it to another generation who will be free and can do better, hopefully. There's a great story from World War II, and it's in a book by Gerda Klein. It's her autobiography. All But My Life is the title of the book, and I think it should be read by more people. And even today, it's very, very relevant, and is about her revelation. I'm sorry, not her revelation. Well, I guess it was a revelation, but her liberation at the time. And she talked about how, as I guess from her where she was, the Russian forces, but as Allied forces began to close in on Germany and advance, driving German forces back, she was forced to leave Auschwitz, where she was stationed, where she had been taken, and she was on a forced march with many of the other women, many of them young girls. She was a teenager at the time, and she was forced to march across Germany, and many of her friends died on that forced march. People she knew from childhood, and others she had become friends with, and many people perished in the way. Some were just executed by the guards. She talked about how she landed in a factory, and one day the guards disappeared with several, and she was there with others, but when the guards disappeared, she walked out, and she stood in the doorway of the factory, and she knew she was free. I think she only weighed about 86 pounds at the time, very diminished, and she said that her hair had started to turn white from, malnutrition and loss and anxiety. And she stood, and she was dirty. According to the book, she had not bathed in 3 years. And she looked out standing in that doorway, and she saw a vehicle coming over the hilltop towards her. It was a funny-looking car, a large sedan maybe, and it had the white star of the U.S. Army on its bonnet. And there were two soldiers, and she described as men in unfamiliar uniforms. And she saw them, and as they got out of the car, and she was both somewhat afraid of them, because soldiers hadn't been nice to her for a while, and she also held them in great awe, because she realized that they had come to liberate her, and they had fought for her at a time when no one else, there seemed like there was no hope. And she held out, and one man approached her, and I suppose as a response, she just looked at him and said, "We're Jews." And the man reeled back, and he stood for a pause for a moment, and he looked at her and he said, "So am I." And the way she tells the story, he very courteously held the door for her to the car so she could get in. And as she writes, he said, "That man continued to hold the door for me for 50 years because he became her husband over time, and she migrated to America. And her name and she became his name was Kurt Klein, and she became Kurt Klein's wife. A very long, happy marriage, from what I understand. This is what we do. This is true free society. We do not harm, we do not beat others down. I think we've kind of lost our way on that over the last couple of decades, but I think we've gotten too involved in the war machine, but I think we lost sight of what we really are about. We do not make war on others to destroy them. We do not repress them. We liberate the oppressed. That is what free people do. That is what people of faith do. That is what faith in free society mandates. And it is our calling. And it is to defend the rights of free society and the rights of people, because it is really our only hope going forward. If we do not do this in the world, no one else will. And those who are afraid, many of our allies who feel weaker and smaller, like some in our society, will fail. They will capitulate to a powerful, powerful nation that wants to stand up to them. So we must not. We must always be that light on the side of a hill. We must be that shining city, always, because that is who we are, and that is a mandate of free society. It is a mandate of our faith that we allow others to breathe free and enter into Christ's covenant. We want to bring others into Christ's covenant, and we want them to allow them to practice their own religion until they are able to or willing to come into Christ's covenant, because it is not a mandate, it is a choice. And we want to give them that choice. And we want people to make other choices. We want people to hope and breathe free and go forward. We want them to anchor the imperatives of their lives in morality, and that morality to be anchored in faith and goodwill. Free society allows us to be separate and individual in our journey of faith and citizenship, and yet united in the power of walking and preserving this journey together. A very strange concept, and something that even with the gun control issue we talked about a while back, it is an individual right that is vested in people who can join together. It is a concept of free society. And it is how we vote, it is how we use the jury, it is how we do everything. We are individuals. We have our imperatives and our choices and our foundings, and our own ideas and hopes, but our own ambitions. But we are united in what we do. So I would charge you not to fear for the end of the world, and I would not charge you to worry about all of the things that have been thrown to you. Put your faith where it belongs. Remember who you are. Remember where you come from and what you stand for. Believe, have hope. Corinthians tells us, faith, hope, and love abide these three, but the greatest of these is love. And we should never forget that. That is a great hallmark for free society. Even if you do not want to be a Christian, it is a great, great hallmark to found yourself in. And we can take that journey of faith and citizenship if we choose to walk that journey at our own pace and our own time. And free society gives us that. And free society gives the ability to choose that path for religion. So I kind of want to wrap things up here. My time is coming close. And get off the topic a little bit. I hope I made my point, but let's just look at one last thing. The philosopher Voltaire once wrote, "Every man is guilty of the good he did not do." Free society, often referred to as democracy within the republic, and we are a constitutional republic, preserves the ability of each person to do good of his own free will. This is the nobility of the common man. Free society allows us to grow beyond the things we did not do, our failings, and make a better life, a better person. This is the journey that each of us walk in our lives over generations. At its core, this is a grace that we see. At its core, this is grace. And if we seek it within ourselves and offer it to others, we must first seek it from God, thereby making a better world with greater hope for our children. This is faith in the Republic, and it is well worth fighting for. In fact, I believe it is mankind's only true hope.